Welcome to another episode of Tech Society, a bi-weekly podcast that offers a cohesive picture of what's happening in the ever-changing world of technology and modern society. Now, here's your hosts, Alex Dunmel and John Nguyen.
Hey techies, today we meet Saxon Phipps, the founder and managing director of Year 13, Australia's largest edutech platform for high school leavers. Saxon is a passionate leader with an intense determination, unwaveringly committed to empowering the audience of Year 13. The team at Year 13 have used data and insights to develop several youth engagement strategies for the Department of Employment, Westpac, and the Department of Education and Training, and countless others.
Let's just jump into it. So do you want to tell us a bit about yourself and Year 13? And
I want to know more about why it exists. What drives you? Why does this whole thing exist, and what do you stand for?
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Saxon Phipps. I'm the founder of Year 13, a platform which helps students to create school transition plans, which is all based around their intrinsic values and their own characteristics. And we do a lot of work around the future of work and the influence in which technology is having on traditional industries. And we kind of coined the term that we're going into this era of the new collar worker. And so that's kind of the precedence of Year 13. Yeah, it's not identified as white or blue, which traditionally has been the two kind of options that it's been presented to us. It's actually a combination of the two, and where we're seeing white collar industries that are revolutionizing traditional vocational industries by the influence of technology. And then we look at what vocational skills and vocational industries actually teach a lot of young people, and how much they're quite entrepreneurial in developing out a lot of our new industries. And so it's that idea, it's not white or blue, it's that they're both as equal as each other, and they're actually presenting this new color of worker. We're doing a lot of work with it at the moment. A lot of, the foundations of Year 13 really came from a lot of the frustrations that I had experienced through my transition from high school, albeit 12 years ago now. But same with my business partner Will, had a similar experience, but different in nature. And so when I came out of the education system, I knew that I wasn't going to go straight into higher education. I knew that I wasn't going to get the marks for the immediate entry. And when I kind of articulated that, I very much so felt as though I got quite alienated and painted with an ugly brush, that, I wasn't going to be going into higher ed. So it was like, well, apprenticeships and vocation are over there, so good luck to you. And I guess it was quite a daunting experience. I had all my friends who knew exactly what ATAR they had to get to go to what uni, to do be in what industry, to do what internship at what age. And for me, I felt really inadequate and like a real loser, that I didn't have those answers and I didn't know what I was good at. I didn't know, because a lot of my subjects, which I didn't know at the time, scaled badly, which I just think is such a archaic way of being able to manage and monitor education, that a lot of my subjects were bad scaling or B grade subjects, which I think goes into a lot of the societal issues we have still today with a lot of education and industry selection. And so I came out of the schooling system, very disorientated and disheartened, like the village idiot, because all my friends knew it had all those grand plans. And so I was lucky. I threw myself into every odd job humanly possible over the first kind of 12 months outside of school. And after that, I was a kind of brickies labourer, I was a steel fixer. I worked in pubs, I worked in cafes, I worked in high-end restaurants. I did a lot, and then took myself off backpacking by myself for 12 months. And after 12 months, I took myself off backpacking for the first time. I left Australia on my own, and I think it was throughout that experience I met so many different people, from different walks of life, be that 40-year-old investment bankers that were backpacking off $20 a day, through to other young 18, 19-year-olds who were from England and Canada and the US and everywhere, and you're kind of sharing these experiences. And I think that really helped broaden my horizon and break a lot of those systematic thoughts that you have, that you're meant to know you want to do and who you're going to be by the age of kind of 17 and 18. And I came back with just this wealth of knowledge and experience, and something which, you know, a lot of people do have, you know, the privilege of experiencing, but mine was certainly very revolutionary for me. It allowed me to be able to come back and, you know, and understand more about what I enjoyed doing. And at that stage, I had so many friends that were really the ones that had that proverbial idea of success were really struggling with the first kind of 12 to 24 months out of school. They hated what they were studying. They hated the industries that they were in. They hated the people that they were working with. They didn't want to be the ones to drop out. There was no way they were going to be, you know, tarred with that same ugly brush as being the dropout. And they just had a lot of the those pressures and didn't want to succumb to it. And didn't really know. And this is, you know, 12 years ago, where mental health amongst a lot of young men and a lot of young people was still relatively kind of new. It was still a bit of a taboo topic. And that was where Will, my business partner, you know, he always wanted to be a carpenter. He's the most quintessential Australian you'll ever meet. He's got long blonde hair, used to wag school to go surfing, and you know, you name it. He was destined to, you know, he loves being outdoors, and he always wanted to be a carpenter. And I'm kind of paraphrasing his story here, but started to do quite well in year 12, and the conversation for him changed. It wasn't about his passions and interests and what he wanted to do. It was about, well, don't be a carpenter, you know, go off into this industry, go be an engineer. You get way more money. It's with you. It's way easier. It's the same as being a carpenter. You're just not on the tools as much. And so where Will and I really linked up was that we had those friends that were just getting pushed and pulled in different directions. And unfortunately had a series of young people in our kind of community and area lives. And this is where we're like, wow, something should be available to be able to, you know, help people with this transition. Why do we have this pressure? You've lived relatively narrow lives throughout your whole tenure at school, and you're meant to know what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And you've got that kind of running question of like, you know, what are you going to do? What uni are you going to go to? And all these things. And when you lay over the fact that we've got subject selections which scale badly, which put negative connotations towards various industries, or you know, you might be a creative young person and say that you're wanting to pursue some creative elements, but it's like, well, don't waste, you know, don't do that. You're not going to do well there. You want to do 4-unit maths, or you want to do this. You're gaming a system which kind of sets you up when you get out into the world. It's like you're then squashing a lot of these intrinsic values and these, you know, your characteristics and your strengths and your interests. And yeah, that was the precedence of year 13. We just wanted to be able to help young people our age. Admittedly, I was 21 at this stage and Will was 19. So we've kind of grown a bit since then. But yeah, that was a precedence of where we started, and we've obviously changed a lot over the past near 10 years. But yeah, it's always been about helping people identify those values. And there's been a lot of research which goes into it to prove the impact that meaningful work has on our well-being and our lives. And
it's interesting that it comes from a place of your personal experience, the whole year 13 approach. But I'm curious I'm on the website now, and year 13 seems to be an academy that teaches their students things that are missing, like life skills that aren't taught in school. There's a gap between, currently in higher learning, we have universities, we have TAFE. Year 13 sits outside of that. We have financial literacy here. But what other things does year 13 teach their students?
What we really look at is, there's a really interesting book called The Lost Connections. And what The Lost Connections explores are the contributing factors to a lot of depression and anxiety that we experience throughout modern day society. And what they've been broken down into is that the 8 causes have been a disconnect from values, a disconnect from meaningful work, a disconnect from other people, role of status and respect, the idea of a hopeful and secure future. There's the role of trauma and traumas that people experience, genetics in the brain, and how to inheriting various mental health issues from parents or if they're habitual. And so when you go back and you look at the first kind of 6 steps of it, if someone doesn't identify with their intrinsic values and their motivation and interests, they're not going into meaningful work or meaningful education, which then means that they're not with like-minded people, or they're with people who are outside their traditional values, which then means that the work they're doing doesn't compel them, It means that their motivation for that work is substantial, which then means that their work doesn't get respected and kind of goes into that role of status and respect, which then means that when you're in a job which you're not enjoying, that you're just kind of in there going through the places, that you're not able to really have that hopeful and secure future and be excited about, the world out there. And so a lot of what we do is help students and young people to be able to identify that first key part, that intrinsic value, and what that means to their characteristics and what that means to them be able to go into further education or employment or start a business, whatever it might be. I think this is the unique period of the world is going through, and what a lot of young people, and especially this generation, are going through. They've grown up with technology and they've grown up with social media and they've grown up with the internet, that this is the influence it's having on a generation. And so
I think they've really grown up with that aspirational programming, right? So you look at Instagram, tons of shows on even Netflix, YouTube. It's all about look at my successful life and look at the successful life you should be living, right? This is the first few generations that are having to really grow up in that culture.
Oh, completely. And, there's a lot of research coming out and saying that the negative impact that social media has had on young people and the development of Gen Z's brain, because, what happens to any notification that you receive, be that through Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, TikTok, whatever it is, it releases dopamine to the brain. It does pose quite an interesting argument about, how detrimental social media has been. But I think I'm quite an optimistic person, and I look at things through rose-colored lenses quite often, that if you can actually channel someone into, with how powerful the algorithms of social media and the internet really is, if you can actually help someone identify those intrinsic values and those seeds of curiosity, which young people traditionally have, we all historically have got those levels of interest in different things. If we can channel that and then be able to use that influence, you can actually help them to build new networks, to start to think in a more positive manner, rather than it being like, oh, I've got to get this 100 likes so so can see me, or that I'm perceived to be like this. And having that consistent validation, I've seen it happen to a number of people that we've been able to work with, that as soon as you can actually change the trajectory that they're on by a few degrees, I think the old saying is that if you're flying from LA to New York and you miss it by 2 degrees, you end up in like Vancouver, which is a completely different part of the Americas. And it's almost the same as social media, that if you can just change that direction slightly and help someone understand those values intrinsic to them, that the outcome becomes quite optimistic and quite powerful.
I noticed that you mentioned a lot about intrinsic and extrinsic values for young people, but I'm sure there are a lot of people that graduate year 12 today and they actually don't know what is valuable to them. They don't know what they want to do.
Isn't that the majority? I wouldn't say the majority of people.
It's pretty much everyone that's young. So now, year 13 can help these young people, the majority of these young people. But how do you find them? How do they?
How do they find you?
Yeah, like what do they do? Do you do any outreach? How do you make yourself known to the people who want to know what their intrinsic values are?
We were really lucky that, in 2011, when we were founded, we saw what power social media was going to be back in 2011. So we were able to build an audience really, really quickly. And the biggest thing that we've always focused on, still through to today, is our users' interactions and engagement with us. Our brand is very much so the voice of young people. And so from our conception, we were doing articles around, are trades greater than a degree? I mean, we're just looking at the rise and fall of different industries and how we had a national skill shortage, and you're studying for the same time that you're working, and just making pragmatic sense of what trades are, because they had these stigmas attached to it. And what happened really quickly for us was that young people were coming through saying, do you actually help people get apprenticeships? Do you help people get into gap years? Mum and dad want me to do this, but I'm thinking about doing this. And so we all, with still, up until today, we see 1.6 million young people come through the platform each year. Whenever we do any of our research and reporting, we always just cycle it back to our audience. So, for example, There's just been a review into the senior secondary review pathway into education and employment, which our research had been cited 13 times throughout these reforms. We recycle that back to the audience that filled out those surveys and participate in those focus groups to say, hey, listen, this is what we did with that data. This is what your voice and your impact have said and you've done. Because we know that with our audience and Gen Zs, they have a real social conscious about them. We know it's like 67% of young people care more about the environment and social impact than they do about news and pop culture. So, we don't sit back and try and talk about, Kim Kardashian's latest expertise or whatever she's done. It's or what's happening on TikTok. Whilst there's all different reasons to be there for a young person, we very much so focus on those impacts and those social impacts which they're looking at and looking towards. And I think it's quite case in point that last year we saw school students demonstrating about global warming and the impact on the environment. There were mass protests, and so that's been a way that we've been able to support and understand what our young people are going through. It's not an agenda of ours, that we don't just come up with these problems for our own solution to just push ourselves. It's really focusing on what young people are. And I think that when we look at things like the mental health rate amongst young people, the 74% of students say that they experience higher levels of stress, anxiety, fear, frustration and depression whilst going through year 12. A stressed mind is incapable of making clear and concise decisions. We know that in the military, they go through 6 months of training in stressful environments to be able to develop those cognitive functions. And so if a young person's feeling stressed, they're feeling anxious, and then it's leading to feeling anxious. Anxiety is a future state emotion, which they're trying to build pictures of themselves, which again goes back to that intrinsic value and what the lost connection was just talking about, that trying to build those pictures of those futures, leading into a sense of frustration, which is also perceived as an inadequacy of self. Like, why don't I know these answers? Why aren't I excited about my future? So it's those negative thoughts and connotations as well. So I know I've kind of gone a long way around about answering that question, but when we look at that, it's just a really pragmatic approach, that if we can consistently understand that they're the barriers that young people are facing. Technology has never been so readily available. They've never had a voice like this in the past. And I guess that we are at this inception point at the moment with a real change in mentality and outlook compared to previous generations, that we've been able to use that in a really positive manner. And I think that that's been really well received by our audience, and we've been really transparent with them throughout our whole journey.
You mentioned parental pressure, which is obviously probably one of the biggest stresses on kids these days. Do you have programs to help the parents, or is there? Yeah,
we do.
Yeah, because I think that's a big problem. And I guess it doesn't matter how much assistance you give someone if their parents are still there telling them they need to do A, B, and C, and throw out any good advice they get to stay on their track. That's going to cause a lot of existential angst, right? So how do you combat that, the helicopter parents and the misguided parents?
I guess it's quite a cheeky way of doing it, but it goes back to the variances and the differences between parents and young people. We know that parents now, if we're looking at kind of the mid-40s, they've got kind of 13, 14-year-olds. They've got some grasp in terms of, a modern-day technology and what it means. But still, a lot of parents don't understand the value of data and decision-making and what that really means. We live in a world now where we talk about regularly that data is the new oil and what that really means. It's not as though, our implicit data, it's more so that you can make educated decisions around whether or not you're going to buy a house in this area, whether or not this industry is going to be around in the next 5 to 10 years. You can legitimately start to pragmatically look at what decisions are how impactful those decisions are through the amount of data readily available. There's so much reporting coming out at the moment that this also poses quite an interesting problem, because a lot of young people, whilst they're understanding how to use technology and understand data, a lot of the labour market data, which as industries and associations we get privy to, isn't being recycled back to the young person. Mm-hmm. So what we do with a lot of parents is that we do synthesize that data into either reporting or communication strategies or various programs, so they can actually understand that. An example we always give that, law is very much so perceived as truly one of the prestigious industries to be able to go into. And, previous generations, it's been one in which you go in and you kind of work there for 30 years and you get the gold watch at the end of it and the shake of the hand, and, you've had a successful career. But, over the evolutions within the legal practice and legal industry, that it's at major risk of disruption due to the fact it's a rule-based economy in which algorithms can be applied to a lot of the early entry-level jobs. So the actual barrier to entry has got a lot higher. It's a aging population, so people are working longer in their careers. It takes the average law graduate 4.5 years to be able to enter the industry. But if you take that same person, and you need to be incredibly intelligent to be able to be a lawyer, you need to be highly analytical, you need to be able to understand rule-based economies. If you take those same characteristics and apply that to a growing industry, and one which I always articulate is something like front end and back end development, and this is something which is on the Australian national skill shortage. The average graduate wage is, I think, $96,000. There's an incredible amount of subsidies going into actually building people into that technology. It's the same thing. It's rule based. It's algorithm. You need to be highly intelligent to be able to be a developer, and so rather than saying you can't be a lawyer, it's almost saying that you have the skill set to be a lawyer, but this is an industry which you can actually apply those same skills. It's only going north in terms of its trajectory. And that's what a lot of work we're starting to do with parents, to break a lot of those stigmas and a lot of those perceived safe industries, or the ones that have that longitudinal value.
Before we continue this podcast, here's a message from our sponsor.
We believe that you can create art and beauty with technology. We think big. We move quietly. We are Ninja Software.
I'm glad you mentioned software developers, obviously, because we run a software company, and we don't place any weight on formal education.
Or certifications, or degrees, yeah.
Well, all we look for is personality traits and proof of ability. I'm a university dropout, so it'd be fairly hypocritical of me to say that the only good software developer is one with a degree, which obviously I think is absolute trash.
I do have a degree.
Yes. and yeah, we wouldn't have found some really amazing people if we'd had that arbitrary requirement. And I think there's still a lot of people who have the skills and don't enter the industry because they believe, because if you just go to Seek and you search the majority of software developer roles, they all require a relevant degree, which is ridiculous. And so it's interesting you talk about they figure it out by doing something they love. So I learned software development when I was like 9, 10, 11 by modding games, particularly Quake. And that's my origin story for software development. And so one of the things we're actually doing is we're launching we call it the Ninja Academy. You can learn how to become a software developer, but we're aiming one of the courses at kids during the holidays on Minecraft development. So, creating mods and stuff within Minecraft, because I think that is the way you learn how to do something technical like that, is by making it fun. It has to appeal to what you want to do. So like the example of in the kitchen, making something delicious and using all these kind of skills like that, I think that applies broadly. If you want to learn something, figure out how to do it in a fun way. It's like if you want to learn how to speak a language, it's much more fun to go to a country and try and order a whiskey and Coke
versus reading a book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think humans have an innate drive to wanting to solve problems. It's in our genetics, it's in our genes. we are master problem solvers. And that's where, if you look at it, and you use something like Minecraft as which is an incredibly popular game, you say, guys, how would you improve this game? How do you make this better? And there's no right answer. There's no wrong answer. It's like, I want to know you yourself. How would you improve this game? Firstly, you're empowering the individual. So they're going, okay, like, what would I like to be able to do? I don't know Minecraft, boys, so I can't give you a great example here.
He's the Minecraft aficionado.
Just think of it as Lego. It's just Lego.
But you kind of change that. So like, it's almost like, what's a problem in the world that you would want to solve? And then how do you fix that? Now, and you can ask that to anyone. Every single person is able to answer that question with an answer of whether it's world hunger, whether it's war, whether it's, racial inequality, whether it's gender inequality, whatever it is. And it's like, okay, now how would you fix that? And then again, you're starting to pragmatically break down these problems and give people, it's empowering towards them, which then starts that momentum, and it plants that seed of curiosity that you get someone to start talking about that, and you just probe with a few questions, and all of a sudden you're 20 minutes into developing out characters in Minecraft who have gap teeth and curly long black hair, and all of a sudden I'm a Minecraft character. But that's the actual way that we have taken our approach, and I think that what you need to see more of that. You go, when you actually do something you're compelled by, you want to get better at it. You start reading about it more. You start following different channels on social media. You start to pick up on people that are experts, and then you start talking, we start talking about these things, and what happens throughout that transaction is you start to build networks, and then it again builds that momentum.
I think it's discovering the agency of someone. So like when you have a problem to solve, and like you said, there's no answer, that builds creativity in someone that might not have developed it through high school.
And it's the way you push through challenges that would otherwise be boring. I would never have learnt to develop software if I was just learning how to write code. If it'd been because the standard way they try and teach software development is you just basically write some code, solve a math problem or something.
Usually you write like a rock, paper, scissors game. Yeah. You write a calculator.
Yeah.
Calculators don't excite anyone. It's one of the my origin story was actually for cryptocurrencies. So I was excited to make wealth through Bitcoin trading and writing bots. So I had a goal, and I lost a lot of money, but at the same time I learned how to program. So it's one of those things, right? So the way we approach it is project-based learning. Well,
I think most of the skills you acquire in life are not in and of themselves that interesting.
Yeah, it's like I hate when
the goal is what's interesting.
I hate when you go to maths class. Oh, was it maths? Yeah, maths back in high school, and English, and there's always a student that says, "What do I need to know this? I can already speak English." Or what do I need, it's one of those things.
What am I going to need? What am I going to need multiplication for? Yeah.
Well, actually, that does crop up a lot. But I think the value of what's being taught in schools are not clear, how valuable a unit is. But it is valuable. But connecting it to the real world, which is what, you do. The financial literacy is a good example. Basic compounding interest, how to invest. It all wraps into stuff that you do learn in school, but actually applied to the real life.
And these are, I guess, this is what I mean by in the current system, you have such a relatively narrow existence, and you're not learning how to change a tire car. You don't know how to do your taxes or how to do your tax file number. You don't know how to register for there's all these things which, if you are lucky enough to have parents who are able to show you these things, then you learn. They will teach you, or a sibling that can teach you. But that's to a minority. To the majority, you don't know how to do these things. You don't know what the relative, how relative doing your taxes really is, or what compound interest really is. I wish someone had told me. I remember hearing it anecdotally that I should save 15% of every one of my paychecks and put it into a savings account. But I was always like, yeah, like a savings, I've got a savings account, but it wasn't actually, how to use that money. And then it just becomes like, oh yeah. And, we all know the trials and tribulations of an 18-year-old trying to save.
Well, in my 20s, I'd save up $20,000 and I'd be like, sweet, I have $20,000.
New car.
Yeah.
UPC.
And then I'd spend $20,000. No one had said, put this in something that you can't just go and exchange it for something nice. Yeah, it's such a small thing. And you're right,
and you guys touched on something before about, I think about creativity. That, creativity, I think, again, has a bit of a stigma attached to it, that it's, exclusive towards, you have to be a musician, you have to be able to paint, you have to be able to sing. Your creativity comes from, you can be creative with numbers, you can be creative with your words, you can be creative in terms of, design and technology. Cooking is a great example of these of being creative. And I think a lot of people, everyone is innately a creative person, but it's about being able to work out what their passion, what their interests are, or where they are very creative in. Some can be, again, words, poetry, writing, reading, bitcoins, understanding numbers. Like, there's so many different things. And again, it goes back to those innate intrinsic values that, you can say you're a really creative cook, means you're quite entrepreneurial. Do you have something what's a problem in the world you'd like to solve? Here you go. And then there's that kind of self-curated story that you're starting to trip over a lot of your own truths. And I think that's a really important kind of area of discussion, and something that I think could really use, a bit of a lick of paint to be able to say that, right, again, it's that creativity within your intrinsic value, your values and your interests, which is the biggest question that I think every person should be asked when they're unsure if they actually are doing something they're enjoying.
So I'm curious about year 13. So far, we've been talking a lot about the education system, but I want to think about it a bit more globally. So I come from an Asian background where education is king, and went through university and all that. And this is actually quite common in the Asian countries, very large focus on rote learning, very, very competitive entrance exams.
And pressure on going into
serious,
the right career.
Serious pressure. So I've always considered Australia to be pretty progressive in terms of exploring creativity, not being too tough on the students in terms of conforming. Has Year 13 done anything internationally, either with the Asian countries or, Western as well? I'm just curious.
About 15% of our traffic comes from international markets. Majority of it predominantly is from the UK and the US. However, I do know, I read a lot of research and a lot of reporting into a lot of those, not stigmatized, but those hierarchical industries, which a lot of the Asian and Eastern cultures have a supreme focus on, be that law, medicine, engineering, pretty much the top three, which we see, and anything else is subliminal and not of real value. And I think, again, it goes back to the impact that really does have on someone's mental health, and I think on the conditioning of what that experience really is. That if you are a creative person and you're a visionary and you can conceptualize big ideas and you can see the world in a different manner, you're going to go into being, say, an engineer. Your work is never going to be as optimal as the person who is naturally a pragmatic, analytical problem solver who has a high attention to detail. It doesn't matter how hard you work, you will always be, whether it's a few percentile or a big percentile, less skilled or driven by the person who is naturally talented at that job or that industry. And I think, again, this is my own personal opinions on what impact that has, but I think that really does drive, I think it actually slows down progression within different cohorts, and I think within different nations, because, well, we've got an oversupply, we've got a surplus of doctors, we've got a surplus of, which isn't really the case at the moment, but we have a surplus of the surplus of lawyers. We've got of all these. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And we know of the digital disruption within the legal industry, and we know what that is, and that's coming from engineers, and it's coming from technology, and it's coming from developers.
I think at the end of the day, humans are human regardless of what culture they're from, and
completely.
It seems that personality wise, self-discovery is something that Australia has done reasonably well compared to other countries, not always. And I think what Year 13 does is actually help with that self-discovery as well.
I think we're at a real inflection point in terms of this generation, and really it's unprecedented, the influence and how much we rely on technology, and especially the internet isn't something that any other generation has ever experienced before.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that now, looking at these changes, looking at where the world is going, and you can use social media to these algorithms as a benefit, and you can actually help people be able to live more fulfilling lives. I think that it's a real natural progression, rather than it being this ranking system of the highest score, go to the most prestigious college or university, and then go off and chase all that, and I think the old saying is in search of Valhalla, which is just this mystical kind of idea of you'll eventually get there and find your happiness, and it's just not the case. I think it's amazing when you speak with someone and you see someone who speaks about passionately about their whatever they spend their time doing, be it working with horses, be that playing Minecraft, starting software companies. You're just compelled by watching that person, and I think that it's a really simple solution to a very complex problem, that you have someone identify what their passion is, get them to talk about it, how would they improve it, what would they do, and
it seems the school system itself today does not facilitate that.
No, not at all. And I think one of something that we're really campaigning for at the moment is a lot of these to break a lot of these stigmas, is that if you do design and technology in year 12, so be that industrial design or jewelry making or whatever it is, that's seen as a grade B scaling subject. So you get negatively scaled for that. Now, what that does, it puts a negative connotation instantly towards that practice or that degree of that, be that design and technology, which means that going off and doing carpentry or going off and becoming an electrician or any of these, these industries, which are the only industries that are still running throughout the epicenter of a pandemic at the moment, that they don't want to shut down because it's the only way of keeping the economy actually running, is still seen, when we go back to the education system, it's still it's a bad scaling subject comparatively. Now, you can say that the ATAR doesn't matter, you can say that that shouldn't impact it, but it does, because it's the pressure's there. Schools are a business. The higher the rank, the higher the fees. So it's still there, and it's always going to be. And until that is actually dissolved, then you're still going to have those problems with those perceptions, and that's where it's like, okay, why do we have this? Why do we have a surplus of people not wanting to go into these industries and going into a lot of these white collar industries? It's like, well, look at how that progression is, and I think it goes back even further than that. I think a big issue is that with the current system, that if a young person is identified as being, disruptive, be that, year 7, year 8, year 9, they're often then they start to direct them into going off into vocation, or going off into, why don't you go off and start doing an apprenticeship, or trying, doing a school base or whatever it might be. Instantly, again, alienating that young person in their community of other young people to go off and not be a part of the majority, go off and try this. Now, if that young person doesn't like the industry, or doesn't like, he's 14 or 15, 16, doesn't know what manual labor is about, drops out or hates that, there's that negative connotation again, which has been brought into it, because it's like, oh, Saxon couldn't even do, his apprenticeship for a week. And then it's like, oh, well, I didn't really like it. And then it perpetuates a lot of those negative connotations. And I've got mates now who, absolutely love their lives sick, who have gone into vocational education later in life, and they've just said that they wish they'd give anything to go back to being 17 and have done a trade or have learnt those skills. We actually, funnily enough, just hired a new product designer who was a carpenter for 15 years and has transferred those skills into being a product designer, in terms of digital design. And he says it's the exact same process as being a carpenter that he was able to learn. And so I think it's a case in point of those skills that you learn from what your interests are and what the task is and how they translate to other areas is what we should really be focusing on.
That's really cool. Yeah, I love that example of the carpentry applying to product design. No one thinks like that. Yeah.
Exactly. Data and decision making. Going back to it.
All right, so we won't take up too much of your time. I think a bit of a call to action would be good. So our audience is actually 100% 25 to 35, according to the X we run. So they're more likely to be probably parents of young kids. What's your advice to them?
I know it sounds really philosophical, and I know that it can sometimes be met with a bit of discouragement, but it truly comes down to that you have someone to any young person discover what their why is, or help them discover it. Why does your daughter or your son like to do what they like doing, and what that means? And then it might be different from you, who really enjoys accounting, to them really enjoying graphic design or drawing or whatever it is, or cartooning. And it's like you let them propel that forward, because it creates that creativity. It makes them think differently. It makes them unique. You then align that to like-minded people, and you just follow that same process of intrinsic value. There's something they're good at. With like-minded people means they're doing meaningful work, they're building a status and respect. And I think this is something, Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot, that with children, you want your child to be a popular child, because it means that other children are actually looking at them as their idols. And we remember what the schoolyard is like when you're trying to define yourself. And so it actually comes down to helping a child be that type of person that people want to talk to, they want to be around, they want to emulate, they want to copy. And I think that comes from being able to help an adolescent and a young person, be the person who they are, not just conditioned into the person you want them to be. But again, I don't know, I'm not a parent, so.
All right, and I think we've got a ton of good stuff there. So we always end our podcast with a bit of a whimsical question, and we've got one that we're rolling with at the moment, which is, I don't know how familiar you are with wrestling and UFC.
I'm big on the UFC.
Oh, great.
What would your introduction music be? So Saxon walks into a room, everyone goes quiet, the music starts, your ego is out on display. What's your intro music?
What music represents you?
Yeah.
I'd have to say, it's funny because I've actually thought about this before, and it changes a lot of the times. But I'd actually say it would be the theme song to Braveheart.
Very cool. That's a cool answer.
That's awesome.
Yeah. It's out of left field. I like it.
Yeah, the bagpipes and the story of William Wallace. When I was playing football as a young man, that got me going. So I think I'd be saying the same there.
Awesome.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great answer. All right.
Perfect.
Thanks so much,
all right,
Saxon.
guys. No worries.
That's a pleasure.
Mate, thanks again. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks,
No
man.
worries.
Have a good
Talk to you
one.
soon.
Cheers.
Welcome to the end of another episode of Tech Society.
On this day in tech, September 9, in 1945, the first bug was discovered. Literally. A moth was found inside the Harvard Mark II, trapped inside a relay.
Thank you for listening, everyone. I'm Alex.
I'm John. See you later.